Guys, just while Willem's getting this up, I got asked in the break around the exponential Africa and children. And what's quite interesting is that if you take the crowdsourcing concept, you'll actually see there on the forms. Remember I said to you this morning, for those of you here this morning, like there's no run to the back of the room, there's no discount. It's even more or less formal. We don't even know how to run the course. And what I mean by that, we seriously want people's feedback. Like, what do you think children would want? Would they want 2 hours? Would they want a day? Is it better to do it on a Thursday and miss school? Is it better to do it on a Saturday? All that we feel very strongly about is that children should be given access. Is that fair? So if you can kind of give us feedback around what you think, and when I say us, I probably shouldn't use the plural us because it's got nothing to do with me, but Willem, just on the form there. And the other thing is, someone asked me around the 4-day event or workshop, I think it's all a work in progress. I think in simple terms, the best way I'd describe it for Willem is that, and he said it earlier, but I'm really repeating it just for emphasis, is that he was part of Deloitte's, he was part of the consulting environment, and he really just wanted to get in, basically in the real world, because he saw there was such a need to actually help people, real entrepreneurs doing real things. Is that fair?
Sure.
So it's a work in progress. But yeah, fill in the forms if you're interested in more stuff. You'll be part of the solution in creating that stuff, if that's fair. Yeah. Is that cool?
Yeah.
Anything else?
Yeah, well, maybe, Thanks, Scott. Thanks for that. Maybe to say that the way that we think this should happen right now is in more sort of school kids language, give them what you've been experiencing up until now. So awaken. And then to say, right, so you've heard about 3D printing. Here's an entrepreneur that runs a 3D printing shop, and he's brought his printers. And you can see that they're busy printing stuff right now, and he'll talk to you about the design and how they're using metal to print now, what they think about molecular manipulation, printing food. So that kid sits there, and he's not hearing stuff that he hears in school. He's hearing stuff about the real world where actual people are running businesses like that and saying, yeah, cool. For an hour, get the guy out, get the next in. We've got a lady that does algorithms. She's coding automation, and she's eating banks bit by, like a Pac-Man, right? Like bit by bit by bit by bit. And all these processes where there are hundreds of people sitting doing recons. She's saying, but that's a repeatable thing. And if it's repeatable, a machine can do it flawlessly. So let's build an algorithm for that. So let her show up and show some algorithms. Maybe they build a small little algorithm that does 2 stupid things, but it opens their minds and plants the seed. Then bugger off. Then the next entrepreneur comes. They say, drones. What fly drones? We bring the VR guy, and then we combine them. Why don't you wear the VR to control the drone, and you fly the drone as the 16, 17, 18-year-old, however, I don't know what the right age is. We think high school. And you go fly that. And it's an experience combined with a technology exposure that allows for this changing of mind. Because if we don't drive it, I don't think the institutions will, because they're incentivized to keep it the way that it's working right now. Right? So, as Scott said, we're trying to crowdsource this. If you have an idea for me as to when I should do this, I don't know what the price point even should be, please tell me, because I'm open to collaborating, and we want to make actual differences. So I wasn't intending on punting the institute. I know it came close to that, but we're not. This is a purpose, and I fundamentally believe that. Thank you. Oh, incidentally, just on purpose, I might also say this. So if you look at crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, the flow of cash, my thing with showing slides like this to corporates, all of this, try to make it more human-like. That one in the middle, let me just find it here. You can see this is the old echo effect of my consulting years. Part of why I got out, and I've mentioned bullshit a couple of times now, probably inappropriately much. So apologies if I'm offending anyone with the language here. But this sort of thing, yeah, it makes sense if you take time to digest it. It's very, very corporate. In all the years that I spent, and remember, I was on a plane twice a week. Then it's San Fran, then it's Tel Aviv, then it's Amsterdam, then it's Melbourne, then it's back to South Africa, then it's Cape Town, then it's Joburg. I've been looking for exponential companies. So when I met these oaks, there's a story about how I met them, which I'll tell you over beer. But when I did meet them, I thought to myself, I'm not sure that they get it. I think Wealth Migrate's full of shit. Because they say blockchain and they say crowd. And I'm like, I haven't met people that know what that means locally. They are the words and the high-level stuff and the definitions. So the chairman said to me, come to our board meeting. And I thought, okay, I'll come because I owe his daughter a favor. And so I went. But I had mates from Brussels flying in, and we're planning their wedding. It's going to be at Meerlus. So I've got my hands full. I don't want to actually go sit at the stupid thing. So I said to them, don't worry, man. By the time you land, I'll be home. Don't worry. Okay, Henny, I'll come. Okay, so I go and I sit there, and they start talking about the technology that they're busy deploying. I think, I think they actually get the crowd. And then Jaco gets up and he says, let me show you the blockchain. And he opens up a live blockchain thing. And I'm like, most people in South Africa don't even know what the difference is between a Bitcoin and an altcoin, or what an altcoin is. Never mind that there's a difference between cryptocurrency and blockchain. And these guys are running a live blockchain thing. And there it switched for me. I got home that night at 10 o'clock. I stayed for the whole board meeting and I said, I'm involved. Let me be involved in this. It is an actual exponential tech. And here's the thing. If you looked at some of those examples that Scott mentioned earlier, you saw Uber. When do you get involved? You don't. Only you get involved when that thing lists. And some of the mates that were included in, sort of the fundraising around it, or initial investors. These oaks are actually opening it up. So can you imagine a crowdfunding company being crowdfunded by all of you? Can you imagine the story that you can tell worldwide about that, A? And B, if you're more commercially minded, if you got in before the thing went public, which is effectively what they're busy doing. So selfishly, that's part of why I'm here, over and above the fact that it prickles my enthusiasm around shit that I've seen all over the planet that I think is bloody magnificent for a South African company. Yeah, man. Yeah, we don't need to stand back for California. Stop that. Okay, so that's actually, Scotty, well done. Let me just ask this. So making it more conversational, I've got a script here, but I'm happy to go off it, as you might have noticed. Where do you want me to go with this? Are there questions that are burning? I've been accosted a little bit here while I was drinking the coffee. Billy, you got a question that you want to forward?
Sex.
No, thanks. What?
Wasted technology on that because there was something on Conference that blew my mind. I'm like, wow. So,
Did you say sex?
Yeah. Take your time.
Maybe I collect the questions and I choose which one I answer. Do you mean gender or do you mean procreation?
Is Demolition Man coming true?
There are so many grammatical mistakes. So,
Do you know the movie?
okay, no, I made another joke there. But anyway, Demolition Man. I don't know the movie actually. Inside of the sexual intercourse space, all right. So here's an interesting couple of things to string together. In population areas or population jurisdictions where there's running water, electricity, and shelter more readily or affordably available, birth rates go down. And so there's a correlation between education and birth rates, but it's inverse. To the extent that the highly evolved education jurisdictions have negative growth rates in population size. There were official programs in Singapore to get people to, sponsored by the government, sponsored to date with a view to leading to sex, with a view to leading to birth rates increasing. So it's already something, all of this advancement of the human race and the things that we can now have on demand, and do I still get married? I mean, just to show you this, I'll blend a couple of themes into the answer and then you can decide the outcome by helping shape it. But where's my digital biology? Yeah. Here's a company that has figured out that telomeres at the end of chromosomes cause aging, because telomeres slow down the rate and the frequency of regeneration of cells. In plain people's language, that means aging. If you don't degenerate fast enough or that pace slows down, you age. And so this is a big data digital biology company based out of La Jolla, actually by one of the founders of Singularity University, that have said, as a shareholder mandate, formally make people that are our customers live to the age of 160 years old in this cycle. So not in 20 years from now. Obviously 20 years would have to go by for you to get to there, but in the customers that we have now, do that. And there's billions of dollars behind this endeavor. So if you just page back a couple of paragraphs, you find that we're talking about manipulating disease out of it, perhaps improving humans, the regulations start to catch up, we can get rid of the terminal diseases. That leads to living longer. Now, if that does happen, it means probably not only from an education perspective, I might have to retool because I thought I would be a doctor or an engineer, but now I can be a doctor and an engineer because I don't live for 480 paychecks and then retire and then have 240 paychecks that I have to go fund out of the initial 480 that I had as per the normal, work 60 years, get a Rolex kind of vibe. Now I might live to be 120, so I've got 480 paycheck periods coming, not earning anything, and I only had 490 to pay, so I can't retire. So I'm going to live longer now. I'm going to have a second career. So maybe it's not doctor or engineer, maybe it's doctor and engineer. but then of course those fields would change, and perhaps what the job spec then requires might also change.
So Willem, here,
Sorry, just this, which puts an entirely different spin on I do until death do us part. Because I thought that was going to be 65. Now if I'm going to be 160, I might want to relook my options a little bit. Term contract. I will marry you until I'm 80, and then we can put or a call option, we can renegotiate. And what's that going to do? Okay, anyway, for the sex side, you can imagine.
So there are two questions here that sort of follow onto each other, which is, how do you foresee the economy changing to adjust for the mass job losses due to robotics and automation?
Okay.
And if you think lawyers, teachers, and doctors will no longer be needed, what will the new professions be?
Now, that is a brilliant question. And let's look at something that I have that touches on this. Everyone knows these companies. Scott spoke about them. So as you can see, we haven't even gone through a third. Can you understand why we say this should be a course that you come to and you go through this thing systemically? We're just trying to give you as much as we can in a very short space of time here. So these companies disintermediated the traditional middleman and broke the value chains. Craigslist got rid of the classifieds. iTunes got rid of the record labels, and everyone knows what the other two did. Now, the other two, there's a whole bunch of things about their growth rates. Here's a staggering thing that I came across around the Uber growth rate. So this is the number of new Uber drivers added to the partner driving network in North America per year. This is not the total. So in other words, it went up and it went down. This is the growth rate, so the new number added. So there we still added, but we added less than the one before. Check it this. It kind of looks exponential, doesn't it? This thing tells you that in January 2015, 40,000 people were added to the Uber driver partner network in North America alone. They will take our jobs as taxi industry. They will kill us. Wait a minute. Have you considered becoming an Uber driver, offering a better service and a safer service to consumers that are demanding that service, as opposed to standing kicking against the change because it's going to unsettle your comfort zone? That's just a mindset. That's not killing a job. That's repurposing a job. In the robotic space, okay, so now these oaks pack the factory, right? That's been happening in Amazon for a long time. That doesn't mean that the jobs just crashed. Crowdfunding created 380,000 new jobs in the first quarter of 2017, jobs that didn't exist. So yes, there are some jobs that are being repurposed and that will fall away because they're become irrelevant, but new jobs are also created. So careful again of falling into the linear trap of these jobs mean automation, which means that people don't have jobs. It is in the pockets that we artificially protect that we find that the greatest risk exists. There is a story. Kevin, I'm going to just a little bit of script here, all right? I sit at a Singularity University forum, alumni, and Musk, one of our compatriots, have these forums where they redefine industries. And one of the ones that they look at is space. This is a long time ago. And inside of this, they get mind frames that are foreign to come and challenge the norms by virtue of the fact that 30 years worth of NASA engineering will give you 30 years worth of reasons why it should stay the way it is. Now, what do you think it costs to launch a space shuttle? Yeah, ish. Large numbers. 400 million? Anyone else? Who thinks it's like 30? Okay, the way I say it, of course not. 680 million US dollars to launch a space shuttle. Why? Because 2/3 of the thing I lose because I burn it. Okay, I can't amortize that again. It's once off. And all the staff and the safety and all the infrastructure that goes around the launch. So if we get 10% better, hell, if we get 20% better at the aerodynamics, which account for 10% of the cost of this thing, translating back to fuel, then we would go from 680 million to 632 million. That's not going to make this thing broadly adoptable. So what if we've got 10% better fuel? Well, then we go from 632 to sort of, what is 10% of 63? So it comes to 6580 something. It's not changing the game. It's merely eking out efficiencies. That's not going to cut it. So let's get some strange oaks in here. So in walks this young guy, NASA engineer sitting around the table, and this oakie with earrings, earrings, earrings. I know this is Cape Town, that's not weird, but earrings for a Transvaal guy, okay, and tats, and a ponytail, and the jeans that kind of don't really cover what it should cover, and he's walking into the room with like a bit of an attitude, right? So he sits down, I'm watching this. He's got 45 seconds as a sum total of space industry experience, and those are the 45 seconds that he took to get from the door to the table. That's what he has as exposure. So he sits, and these guys start to talk. Rockets, aerodynamics, yield per pound of fuel, aerodynamics, all sorts of engineering babble. It goes on for about 30 minutes. And this guy's just he's sitting with his feet sort of on the table, rocking the chair, and all these other, all dressed oaks, they're sitting there having this conversation. So then at some stage he gets a bit irate, and I watch this and he says, excuse me. Very dramatic. How many people are we sending to space? And they say, 5. And he says, okay, so that's like this corner of the room here. There. Why is the thing that we're sending them in the size of this building, if that's the number of people we're sending? And these guys, irritated by this, obviously wet behind the ears, slightly arrogant snot nose, okay? And they give it a bit of an eye roll, and they say, haven't you been listening? Okay, there's fuel that you need to add to burn, to lift off, but the more fuel you add, the heavier it becomes, the more fuel you need to lift off. The more fuel you put in, the heavier it becomes. Parabolic relationship, because there's a slight diminishing factor at the apex of this thing, a little bit of safety, that's how much fuel we put in. And the Okie says, so that's, if you don't mind my drawing an analogy, that's like saying, you're going to have a baby, and when it's born, you're going to give it a suitcase with all of the clothes that it'll ever wear. And as it's moving around, going about its life, it's got to live from this suitcase and then chuck the others away. That's a heavy burden. Why don't you just get the baby a credit card? And so as and when it needs clothes, it buys it and it wears it. No suitcase required. NASA engineers, that perspective, not compatible, tension in the room goes up, and they say, haven't you been listening? How the hell would you do that? And this Okie, now seeing his gap, switches into full cockiness mode, and he says, now rocking back, so you don't know who I am, do you? And now you can see the engineers going, running through the calculation. There's something that we don't know that is causing the risk matrix in this room to change a little bit. Now they're a little bit more apprehensive. He says, we haven't even introduced ourselves. No, super cocky. He says, you know who I am? I'm Sergey. So Sergey is actually a first-generation American-born ex-Serb that is now in the graphic design. But when he was a youngster, 15, 16, he had created a modem, which we think is a thing that you plug into the wall that sings that funny song before it connects you to the internet at 14.4 BPS. It's not. Modem stands for modulate, demodulate. So he's built this modulator, demodulator that you stick into a wall socket and it checks electricity, turns it into microwaves. You can send it from one node to another node, catch it, reconvert it, demodularize, stick your cell phone in and charge it. And he did this between 2 islands of Hawaii, and he had a helicopter that made sure that the thing was aligned, and they had this as a Discovery Channel documentary. You can watch it tonight. That's who he is, and he explains to them, I'm the guy that moves electricity wirelessly. Musk listens to this and says, holy shit, we've just changed spaceflight because now I don't need to pack the suitcase. I can send the energy to and from the ship as and when it needs it, which means I fundamentally have reimagined the value chain of launching a rocket. And since then, how many companies have you seen cotton onto this and are now trying to land rockets because I'm going to reuse and reuse and reuse them as opposed to send up, burn, and it's gone? Send back a capsule with 3 people in it. Land it in the ocean. No. Land the entire thing because I'll use it again. Okay, so that's one thing. Second thing, so bear that in mind. I can now send the energy as and when needed, making space travel a hell of a lot cheaper. Amortization of the infrastructure looks different. Second thing, the sun hits the earth with enough energy in 7 minutes to account for the sum total of all of our non-renewable resources. 7 minutes. It's an abundant source, not going to burn out in our generation, or if you ask me, in the way that our species currently looks. It'll be thousands of years. So, if all of that energy source is available, why aren't we harvesting it? Well, up until now, spaceflight's been a bit heavy to get out and pick it up and come back. And how would you do that anyway? So we're now building solar farms, the likes of which I showed you a little bit earlier. But what if we could build a farm outside of the atmosphere? Okay, because inside of the atmosphere, you've got atmosphere in the way, 7 minutes we don't fry because of the interference and the isolation that we have, and day-night, and cloud cover, and breakage, and theft. Becomes too much of a thing. But what if we sent something out, built it out there, harnessed it, and sent it back? Subsequent to the Ukraine being invaded by Russia, there was a trade embargo imposed on Russian technology, Russian companies, obviously including technology companies that provide services to US state-owned enterprises. Post the moon landing and the Cold War, nations have been collaborating in getting to space. 40% of what NASA uses, argument's sake, as service technology to launch rockets comes out of Russia. Now, can't do it anymore. Sanctions. So Musk gets in the car, drives down the road, Singularity and NASA share one of the campuses, drives around and he says, bad news, good news, NASA. Bad news, you're a rocket launching company that can't launch rockets anymore because you can't use the service providers that you use to perform the task. You're going to have to find someone else to do this for you. That's the bad news. The good news is Here I am. I've got a space company. But I want to renegotiate the payload that we send to the ISS, because on the way I want to build a space station. So now, building a space station, a solar farm in the atmosphere that can harness the power of the sun, unencumbered by ozone and atmosphere, which saves us from frying. So the full brunt of those 7 minutes, put it wirelessly to wherever I want on the planet. And then what did you see him launch? I think it was 2 years ago, or just shy of 2 years ago? Batteries. Tesla wall power. What's it called? E-wall. Power wall. It's a Panasonic battery, really, but it's under the Tesla brand, which means it rolls out, and he's building gigafactories around this. So now think about this. Stand back. Harvest, distribution, storage. That's Edison, California, or ESCOM. One of the first things that happens subsequent to this is Edison, which is their ESCOM, puts a regulation in place. Again, the regulator wakes up and says, ooh, illegal to take your house off the grid. Can't do it anymore. You can harness your own energy and then put it back into the grid, but we have to resell it. You can't resell it. This allows two households to be next to each other, unconnected to a state-owned grid, and share the electricity if, for instance, one doesn't have the resources to build the battery. So you buy the battery, I buy 10% of your battery because I can't afford the whole one by myself, and we can wirelessly transmit between us. In fact, we can wirelessly transfer to anything that needs energy. What doesn't need energy? Right, back to the question on the jobs. So if 280,000 petrol jockeys are in South Africa unionized, which means it's illegal to build a petrol station without having a petrol jockey employed there. That's great. We protect their jobs. We're also isolating them from the effects of this and forcing them to also change where they participate in the value chain through upskilling or de-skilling the current crap that they know and put new crap inside of their head so that they can actually actively participate. Because the unions isolate them. What happens when everyone drives around the petrol station because we can get our sun power to fuel our cars, if we still use cars? Then 280,000 oaks have been precluded from change by virtue of trying to do good. Short-sighted. That's why we have to be aware and then involved in policy. So jobs will change without a shadow of a doubt. Jobs that we know currently will fall away. But the rest of the game doesn't stay static. Inside of that game, there are other rules that change that create new jobs. Someone asked me around teaching a little bit earlier. Well, people will always need to be taught, but how they are taught are different. Okay, so now you can either sit and wait until the teaching train arrives for disruption and then go, oh, now I'm out of a job. Or in the meantime, you can start to experiment with these things, become aware, get into the community of people that are busy changing education, and then say, perhaps I'm one of the engineers that offers a solution to everyone to get change. And then I'm not a teacher anymore, but I'm a teaching engineer of the future. Now that is a mindset difference. And the difference between the people that make it and the people that don't will be that openness to embrace the change as opposed to trying to regulate it and stop it from coming. Last point on this, trying to stop this revolution is like standing in front of the ocean with a broom in your hand, sweeping back the tide of the ocean. Good luck. It's bigger than all of us. Okay, sorry, that was a bit of a soapbox, Kevin. I'm surprised
little bit, yeah,
you didn't
a little
pounce
bit,
on
a
me
little
earlier. More questions? Before we start to dip back into the script, I think it's become largely irrelevant, the script. We can do this.
Where are we with
conversation.
renting AI?
Can I come back to renting AI? Ma'am, you had a question during the break already.
On the cell phone, I'm just thinking about putting the whole of our deed registry on the blockchain so we don't have this once own 80% of the land.
Ma'am, you just said a word that I like to challenge. So that we don't, just say that again if you don't mind, that the who doesn't have a challenge on their land? The whites.
Well, it's just these people that open their mouths and say certain population groups
Sure.
own huge
Okay.
percentages of land. So if we could have some real statistics of what's really going on.
Yes, real statistics. I challenge the word population groups. I'm so glad you used that. What is white? What is black? Anyone care to venture? Ooh, it's South Africa. We can't talk about this. Luckily, I'm outside of corporate, so I'm ready to roll on anything. I beg your pardon? No. Okay, so I don't mean why do you look a certain way. It is created by the melatonin, amongst other variables in your body, yes. But can you define for me, for the purposes of, let's say, something that touches all of us, black economic empowerment? What is black in that definition? What does it mean? How do I prove it?
You're a free Jack too.
Let's not go totally political. I'll do that with you over gin and tonic afterwards, ma'am. I'm going to love that conversation. But in the meantime, empirically speaking, from a data perspective, being rational human beings, let's not get emotional about this and dip into the easy trap of politics. Let's just say, what is it that I need to comply with the law to be a part of, I don't know, MTN's latest share issue? that is for black people? You need to be black. But what is black? Because your ID book doesn't differentiate anymore. It used to, not anymore. So you're just born. Okay, and there's a photo. Now, I don't know if you've seen all the photos that they use in the State Department. They're not all that great. So sometimes on the photo you can't tell. When I was at Deloitte, the Cape Town office had a very close colleague of mine that I'm still befriended with, Lushane Abrams. Lushane is fairer in complexion than what I am, but she's colored. She says she's colored. How does she know she's colored? How do I know that I'm white? Am I white? Not necessarily, sir. That is the right answer, because now, check your DNA. There is empirical evidence sets in the world that exist today that all of us have got access to. I can do a DNA test, and so I did a couple of years ago. I think it was 2.5, 3 years ago. Turns out that one of the reports, as they gather more and more and more information about the different types of DNA out there, and the AI and the machine learning is looking at this, is finding out some interesting things about us. So I asked for my ancestral report. In fact, I didn't ask it. It emailed me and said, we have your ancestral report. Would you like to look at it? I said, yes. Let me have a little look-see. Where do I come from? So I have 3% African black genes in me. Okay, now that doesn't answer necessarily what it is defined, but consider that it is a certain data group, so call it triangle. So I have enough triangles in the makeup of my all little forms to constitute 3%. Now let me ask you this. Therefore, am I white, black, Indian, colored? Triangle, what am I? What am I? I'm still white. Not empirically. It's not hypothetical, it's empirical. It's data. So it's a sensitive topic, okay? So we're reluctant to talk about it. But the fact is that at some point, society as a whole is going to mature to the point where we're going to have the data tell us. It's not like, sir, I'm going to use you as an example because you're such a lacquer oak. I know you came to talk to me afterwards. But it is a fact. Okay, but you haven't tasted it. You don't know that. But I am convinced it's a fact. But your conviction is not a fact. Your conviction is a conviction. And as a society, it's going to take us into very difficult, I think, conversations because the data will enable it. Why did I start talking about this? There was deeds on the blockchain for population groups. I think the definition of population groups is going to mature to a point where we know what we're talking about as opposed to infer what we're talking about. I think that will change. And as a consequence, the downstream stuff that we base on that argument as a whole will also be subject to the same change and maturity in it, which I think is going to be great. It'll liberalize a lot of emotional conversation, make it rational. Sensitive topic. Where did we leave off here? Disruptive. I'll stimulate a little bit more and then prompt me with questions as we go. Everyone's heard of the Kodak moment, right? So Kodak failed and they bankrupted themselves. Do you actually know how? So big company, 144,000 people at one stage, $10 billion turnover per annum. That's pretty big. 2012, you could buy a Big Mac for a more expensive price than what you could buy a Kodak share with. Totally, the bottom fell out. How? Because they thought they were a printing and chemicals company. Printing and chemicals, ladies and gents. They thought that do you remember the era of the boo-boo bin for C&A, where you took the photos and you had 12 or 24 or 36, and then if some of them were a little bit out of focus, you could get a little discount because you didn't cost about $1 a photo, more or less. They said that we're not in that business. People will take photographs the way that we know they will. Here's the guy on their payroll, Stephen Kelly, made the world's first digital camera, which he's holding right there, 0.01 megapixels. And here's the equipment that you need to look at the picture. So there's the little value chain that he made, and the board looked at it and said, yeah, not going to work. No one's going to do this. That's not our business. Little understanding that perhaps all of this is also subject to exponential tech, and it will shrink, it'll become cheaper, it'll become easier to access, and eventually we now have companies that are being bought for over $1 billion when 10 people work at it, because I now have so many digital publishing capabilities on my phone, of which this is one, that I've got so many versions of the same photo that it takes me more time to pick the right version. And what did it cost me additionally? Nothing. Totally demonetized, totally democratized, totally dematerialized. In fact, check out what's happened to the industry as a whole. On the left-hand side, ladies and gents, the yellow line being the analog number of photos taken per year in the world. In 2011, it was already down to what it was more or less in the mid-60s, while the total number has just been increasing. It's only the aficionados and the hobbyists that still take pictures with old-school cameras. Same kind of thing happened in the SMS and telco space, right? So here's telcos and the number of SMSs sent in billions per day. Do you remember when Vodacom charged you 99 cents? So that's a rand an SMS. This is in billions. And there it goes. And it climbs and climbs. And then something happens and it starts to drop. If you look at the rest of this curve, that blue thing is now down here because WhatsApp and the introduction of platforms like it have totally democratized and demonetized that industry as a whole. And if you were billions and a rand per one, your income statement had a nice, fat, big piece of SMS revenue on it that now is Gone. If someone sends you an SMS now, it's weird. Right? Why do you send me on a platform? Why are you paying for this? You're stupid. Why are you doing that? All right? And of course, the way that this works in this space, and comes back to my point, Scott, earlier about Wealth Migrate, why I'm involved, right? So everyone knows WhatsApp, and then came iMessage. Do you want to guess the market participation stats of WhatsApp versus iMessage? WhatsApp has got 60% of the market. iMessage has got 30% of the market. Every other platform is fighting for that last 10%. First mover takes the bulk of the market. WhatsApp. And now what do they look like? They're not big companies. They're startups and they're semi-mature. We joke, we say that Wealth Migrate is not like APSA, hundreds of years, or it acts like it's hundreds of years old, and it's not a startup in a garage. It's kind of in that adolescent phase where it's still, it's starting to shave now, and it's got a couple of bad skin marks, it's got pimples, so here it's going. And this is the typical profile of companies like that. Here's WhatsApp, 5 years old at the time. 5 years old, 450 million users in 5 years. That's bloody astonishing. 55 employees, bought for $19 billion, of which the majority was in cash. And that gives you $345 million US value per employee working there. It's not a big company. It's tiny, but it's big, right? So check the competitor, the guy that's been there, sat in the seat, 23 years old, less subscribers, multiple X of the same number of employees, so 93,000, worth 128 billion. Yes, it's worth more, but the per capita is way down there. Same thing is happening in a variety of spaces. Think of banking. I added this morning. If you haven't seen it, Scott, here we go. All right, this is the number of complaints registered in a variety of different banking products over the last 5 years. What do you notice as the trend? That consumer that we spoke about earlier is saying, no, I don't need this crap. Out of this, so look at this, bank account service delivery. It's doubled over the last 5 years. Consumer loans, it's more than doubled. Credit cards, 19% to 26% overall. Credit reporting, through the roof. Mortgages, I don't know why. I think it's because the term of the product is way, way longer. So that's probably why it stayed. Student loans, more. You saw fees fall also. But this is not just South African. This is globally. But I think the young generation has also become way more vocal and is way more connected than what we were. Can you remember sitting on Jamie's steps back in the day protesting apartheid? Great to have done that. But it was an isolated group of individuals that connected with each other, if they were lucky, using things like telegrams. Okay? Whereas now, let's organize a movement, and in minutes we can rally 100,000 people. So I think that constitutes
maybe the mortgages is flat because the millennials haven't been buying properties yet because they can't afford to and don't want to.
Yeah, that's very possible. Or my dad that doesn't have a smartphone is in the mortgage space, and he can't connect with a whole bunch of other people and voice his complaints. He thinks that Hello Peter is still the way to go complain digitally. Oh, Dad. Okay, so a lot of things are happening in the banking space. They're becoming more and more digital. We saw it with currencies. And if you're at the dinner tonight, I'll talk extensively about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and what's been happening over the last while, regulation around it, where I see it going. The consequence of which is that lots of companies and individuals are now starting to say, perhaps I need to relook it. So, ma'am, in teaching, everyone else in other industries that have been affected, doctors, engineers. This is an endeavor by a bank. I actually used to look after them. I'm not sure if this is the right answer necessarily, but I do know that they're trying something. Because the surefire way of being consumed by the disruption, so getting the short end of the stick, is to do nothing. And this is at least trying to do something about it, which I think is the noble thing. A quick interesting thing, another competitor or big behemoth that has actually realized what to do about this, because now can the big companies change? Think about this. When I retired now, I had to do something with my pension contributions up until now. So what do I do with it? Because I've got a number of years before legislation allows me to retire, even if I somehow manage to orchestrate an early retirement. So what do I do with it? What about Old Mutual, right? My dad says. And I said, okay, Laka, I can look at that. So look at their products, look at the fees. Ooh, big fees. But they have a balance sheet that has near 300 billion rand behind it. So if something happens, they won't fall over. Will they? So I'm starting to doubt that. You know what I mean? So what do you do now? Because now you're personally invested and you sense that something's going to change, but you don't fully have a tested alternative to it. What the hell do you do? So a lot of the big corporates in the US, this is the learning that I bring back from there, have started these little experiments. Here's an experiment from a company by the name of Modern Meadows that extract DNA from cows and initially started by building leather products from it. So leather without the cow. It's called cellular agriculture. I grow it. Okay, so now the thinking around this is, and there's an example of where you get to this university and they make you eat 2 patties, 2 burgers. They've got patties in them. And the one patty has been grown using cellular agriculture technology, having extracted the DNA from the cow, and the other one is the one that we buy at Woolworths. And they say to you, here are the two. Can you pick the one that's real? Of course, that's a trick question because they're both real. It comes from the DNA of a cow. So I tell the story, and then CEO said to me, but how did it taste? It tasted exactly the same because at an atom level, at a molecular level, these two pieces of meat are exactly the same. That's where the artist in one of the previous sessions says to me, they're not the same because the one never had soul. Yeah, he's got a point, right? He's got a point. Be that as it may, the first burger will cost $100,000 to make. All the research, development, lab, yada, yada, yada. Second one, feed 2 people, 50 grand. Third one, 33. Fourth one, 25. And so the thing carries on. And perhaps this means that we're on the brink of being able to solve hunger, at least as a humanitarian challenge, by virtue of using technology for the good of it. So not just taking jobs, the robots are going to kill us, they're not going to like us, AI is going to automate my job, the lawyers and the judges will be electronic. Hell, there's a lot of great things that we can achieve with this technology as well. And again, it's a perspective of mind frame. You choose to embrace it, even though sometimes it makes you a little bit uncomfortable. Or the alternative, which I think holds way more opportunity.
Willem, that goes into this question, which says, if you slow down aging, improve medicine, prolong life, does that, how does overpopulation? My brain is...
The more advanced we become as a race, in every pocket where advancement has been measured, the lower the birth rates. There is a book called Abundance and another book called Bold by one of the founders of Singularity University called Peter Diamandis. So if you do make a note and you like to read the stuff, I highly, highly recommend. Start with Abundance. It's an easier read. And it talks about this era in which the basic needs of man, woman, and child are met by virtue of technology. So think shelter, we showed you 3D printing. Think food, we show you the DNA extraction. Think medicine, it's becoming very cheap because 16-year-old kids are now making $2 pancreatic cancer detection systems. So all of our basic needs taken care of. Let me show you something which I think is going to happen. I know this might also be perceived as sensitive, but Peter Diamandis. Now, I hope that I've got the clip here. I'm going to go off screen. There must be a faster way to do this. Okay. Bear with me for a sec, ladies and gents. This is an important thing. What that means, effectively, is that we're going to enter an era where there won't be have and have-nots. At least from the foundation of Maslow, we'll have haves. Then, I think, the future equivalent of the Gini quotient is going to be have and have a lot. Not have and have not. But there is... Oopsie. My KZN friends have been playing with my background on my... oh, fuck it. Okay. Let me show you this. Right. Let's get the short one here. Play this.
Getting grape and you will see what happens.
So let me just get the context here. Have and have nots. Have and have a lots. Remember my comment around walking in here and being judged, the 7 seconds that you took to form an opinion of me? Do you remember when we said that we infer our bias onto the data and then we suffer confirmation bias because we have one thing that comes out and we say, lekker, see, I told you so, negating the fact that 99 other instances or samples showed you something different. So human bias, bias confirmation and judgment. I think this have and have a lot scenario is not going to play out well. I think you will have the human element enter that conversation or debate, and you will have a perception of inequality. You won't have actual inequality, you'll have a perception of inequality, and that is going to unlock quite vehement behavior, I think, all over the planet. Here is an experiment with 2 monkeys being asked to do a task. Subsequent to the task, they receive a reward. An important thing to notice is that between the 2 cages, there isn't an isolation barrier. In other words, the monkeys can see each other, and they have exposure to the reward systems deployed in each of their little ecosystems. translate that back for cash, have and have not. Watch this.
Getting grape and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again.
Okay. You get the gist of it. Just we laugh at it because it is presented in quite a humorous way. But just see what's happening here. Perhaps less noticed, but just I'm going to draw your attention to something.
See, the other one sees that.
Look at the vehemence of the monkey. Yes, anger. Exactly right. Check at this. It's going into a physical act of trying to rectify the situation. I don't think have and have a lot is going to solve the have and have not emotion that exists. We're going to have to find a different way of measuring that. My hope is that the human evolves with this change to the extent that what we value starts to differ, so that it doesn't matter whether I have a Bentley or a Corolla. It matters that I'm fulfilled. And in the space where a lot of our jobs will be automated and we'll ask ourselves, what do humans need to do? My sense is that we'll have to rediscover purpose. And my hope is that with all the real estate that we unlock, because we're using VTOLs as opposed to parking lots, that us as humans will deploy our time into rekindling things like relationship and love and purpose and fulfillment, and that those would be the things that we strive to achieve as opposed to looking at whether or not I wear a breitling. That's my hope, personally. I want to just show you one other thing while I'm going off script. What the hell, we're there. And this is generative design, which is typically something that I would more talk about tonight at the Wealth Partner dinner. Generative. You remember my earlier conversation around what I think people will do when it comes to, and I think I used the example of architects. So let me just pause this for a sec. Ladies and gents, what Autodesk does, or what they did 20 years ago, I was at high school and I was playing with computers, and this was a company that allowed you to draw a picture on one end of the screen, let's say a circle, and then you drew a triangle on the other end of the circle, and then you would say, other end of the screen, and then you would say render. Now render was the word to say, take this shape here and turn it into that shape there, over there. So it would move this thing and it would morph as it would go. And that was like the first animation piece that we used to get things into Pixar and Toy Story and the like, that sort of thing. Now, Autodesk sits on Pier 9 in San Francisco, and I happened, literally by happenstance, to walk past the offices, and I saw a guy that I knew, and we started talking. He said, have you heard of generative design? You're in exponential tech. And I said, ashamedly, I must answer no. I don't know what that is. He says, strap your seatbelt on. I'm going to take you on a ride. So we walk up, and these guys roll out this example here. Let me play the example, and then I'll explain a little bit as to what happens. These designs that you see over here, let me rewind a little bit, and I'll put the thing on mute so I talk while it plays. Effectively, this is putting a whole host of sensors onto something like a car. And then the engineers take this car and they drive it in a variety of different conditions, and the sensors measure the outside conditions that this car has been exposed to. So force, temperature, speed, collision potentially, all of that stuff. And then they have that as a data set, and they give that data set to artificial intelligence and infinite computing power, and they combine those exponential technologies, and they say, if the car needs to transport 4 people, put some bags in the back, and be able to do 600 kilometers on a tank, and basic variables to limit the thing, what would you design, AI, as a car? And then it takes, what materials do you want me to use? Let's say glass, plastic, titanium. And it takes a blank sheet of titanium and it starts to shape it. Hundreds of millions of permutations of what this thing could look like. And then you introduce the glass. And then, of course, it triples the number of permutations that you can have. And then you introduce the other material. And so this thing just runs through billions and billions and billions of these different material combinations to come up with design. Now, that is quite staggering. So I sit in this meeting and I say to the oak, whoa, That changes everything that's designed. Just pause. What in this room isn't designed? Okay, make that point. And I say to him, tongue in cheek, hey dude, have you tested God's work? He says, what? I said, yeah. Have you put sensors on a human or a series of humans and collected that data and said, how good is the architecture here? And he smiles and he says, yes, we did. And he whips up the rendering files and he shows me. The AI thinks that the design of the human as to where it's evolved to now is like 97% efficient. That's a pretty good engineering feat if you think about it, which poses a whole series of other questions which I'm not going to open because that gets really sensitive, right? And then he says to me, but you wanted to open this rabbit hole, so let's run at this now. Now, you can see my enthusiasm, but now I'm also getting a little bit scared like those NASA oaks, because now I thought I would pose a question to catch him left field. And he says to me, okay, you want to go left field? Let's go all the way left field. Willem, how many people do you think in the history of the existence of the human race has ever looked at the design of a building? Now, if you were posed that question, what would you answer? How many people do you think in our collective existence has tried to design a building? But remember, because we say parking lot, if it's a high-rise, parking lot, foundation, pillars, platform, pillar, platform, more or less. Some round, some square. We've got some variation. Different heights. But how many people do you think? Do you think it is 1 million? Yeah, I also think so. I think upwards of that. You think 10 million? Maybe 100 million. Let's roll the dice and we say 500 million people in the history of all of our race has looked at how to design a building and has thought of something and has ultimately culminated in what we see today as cities. These oaks are sticking sensors into all of the downtown areas that they could lay their hands on, aggregating data as to the conditions that exist inside of those cities. So in San Fran, there's ocean, for one, all right? In Dallas, there isn't. So what does ocean do to the environmental data? What does the wind do? What does the soil type do? What is the depth of the thing? What does the San Andreas fault do? What does the number of people do? What does the traffic do? The noise. And they take all that data, and now they're saying to AI, why don't you design the building for us? Now, I don't have the clip here because they didn't publish this, but it's on another laptop. I'll show it to you if you come to the wealth, and I'll try to find it in time, where buildings are being designed that look nothing like what we think a building should look like. Much like the cars that you saw, they look nothing like the cars that we think, the way that we think a car should look. And now, okay, this is fantastical, because what that means is the 400 billion options that you are given as to a design. A human, I think, is going to sit in that and say, well, this will sell if it looks like the following. Perhaps there's some data around that you also deploy, but the aesthetics of the creativity judgment choices are, I think, where the human will play a role, as opposed to the actual design, because that we've now automated in its entirety. So new jobs being created, perhaps allowing us to tap deeper into our creative selves. In the meantime, until we get there, because you can see we've got this constant conundrum of where we are now, where we thought we were, where we actually are, where this is going one day, and then what the hell to do with the meantime. This meantime thing is what's killing all of us. It's burning questions. Airbus have started now to say, can we not redesign planes? Okay, so here are some materials that we think should be used, given the safety regulations as the environmental thing and what an airplane does when it takes off and it lands. Those are the environmental strains. Make us a Boeing. And the Boeings that are being produced now out of this sort of generative design application are 70% lighter than the Boeings that we used to have, which means the fuel goes down, the safety goes up, and the price goes down, making travel more accessible to all of us. So there's good things that come out of this. We need not fear it. We need to embrace it and find a way to harness it. I think I've stressed that point enough now. I'm not going to... Okay, Scott, I think I'm about to wrap up. I wanted to leave you with a future scenario to think about. So we've spoken about the technologies predominantly and where they are, where they could go, and we've touched on where industry could go. Here's a value chain that I think this is subject to disruption now. So devices at the top called wearables. Apple Watch tells me my heart rate, tells me my calorific burn rate, how far I walk, how fast I walk, how well I sleep, a whole bunch of data around me. Okay. The next version also, I saw Tim Cook wear one, measures blood sugar level. So that's obviously in an attempt to treat diabetes and the insulin administration of a diabetic. Now, all of the main companies inside of this space are listed, and they've got hundreds of millions of users. Every single one of them in the innovation lab has got a prototype ready that's not called a wearable, but an insidable. So it goes under your skin. And networks and sensors are also an exponential technology, which means the things that we're able to measure can also increase exponentially. So now I can measure serotonin, oxytocin, testosterone, blood sugar levels, a variety of things that make you a certain profile of either healthy or unhealthy. So now, Go with me on this. Incidentally, I'm involved in a life insurance company in San Francisco that doesn't use underwriting to measure risk. In other words, it doesn't ask you to fill out a form. Do you smoke? Do you gym? Vitality. Okay? It doesn't do any of that. It gives you a pill. And the pill is the size of a grain of sand. You swallow it, and there's about 100 nanobots inside it that deploy to different parts of your body that take measurements of the health of those different parts of your body and tell it back to the phone, and the phone tells us, and then we measure your risk and therefore your premium based on your actual health. Okay, so wearable becomes insidable, becomes ingestible. That's wild. Now imagine I've got enough of that data for the planet as a whole. I stick it into the cloud and I let AI, machine learning, robotics, whatever you wanted to call it, because now the names don't matter so much anymore. And I say, you find me the data. And then we know that a 35-year-old male working in banking that exercises like this, drinks water like that, drinks alcohol like this, has sexual activity profiles like this, and everything about your vitality that we look at, we know that a heart attack is going to happen in 7 days from now because the data knows that it's going to happen, much like knowing that a woman is going to be pregnant by virtue of her shopping habits changing. And so 3 days before the heart attack occurs, we deploy preventative medicine with the use of a drone, and we prevent that inflection point from happening in the first place. I showed this to a big pharmaceutical company in South Africa that's also a global player. They said that is never going to happen because we said to them, think about this. All of your stores and your warehouses loaded with pills. Some of them sell, some of them don't, because you've been trying to do actuary data on what to stock. Perhaps you get rid of the real estate because you know what diseases are coming, and so you manufacture the pill on demand by 3D printing it. In fact, if you really want to be exponential, why don't you stop all of this value chain and you become a data company? Because this device will tell you when the consumer needs medicine, and you will email him the copyrighted IP of the concoction that goes into the pill so that he can print it in his house. How about that? And the oak said, ha ha, that will never happen. And I showed him one more slide, and then he changed his tune. Because this, I took 2 days before actually walking into that meeting, and you read the heading there, the FDA approves the first 3D printed drug. It's 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. Because that was August of 2015, so 1.5 years ago. And that process of approval took 3 years. And it's not one company that's in the approval process. There's multiple companies in the approval process, which means that multiple more companies are approaching the approvals process. So if you think as the big one, the big company, the big pharmaceutical company, nothing's going to change because we control it. It's already changed. It's happening all around us. There's another clip here of driverless trucks that deliver this stuff just to drive the point home. I mean, we can go on and on and on. We can talk about how deceptive it is. At this stage of the game, we've had a full day. I think I'm going to call it quits. If you want maybe to do 1 or 2 questions and engage, we're happy to do that. But I think up until now, point driven home. Afterwards. Okay, perfect. All right. Scott, so then for that, I'm going to pause for now, and then I'll reconnect with you a little bit later. Let's hand it over to Scott. All right. Thank you.
Woo.